In today's podcast of Data for All, processing your data. Welcome to the Data for All podcast. I'm Charlie Apigian.
And I'm Charlie Yielding, where we want to empower you to think different with data.
And in today's podcast, we actually are going to focus our attention on the other Charlie Yielding today. And instead of diving into something that maybe is one of my topics, we're going to go into something that he has become kind of an advocate for and talks a lot about within his environment at work. And that's diving into his process for using data in a person's everyday life.
Well, not just life, work, anything to do with building ideas, managing tasks, projects, like just keeping up with the modern digital age, we'll say. And
okay, so keeping up with. What do you mean by keeping up with?
Well, so we were talking about this before, is like, how do you qualify what this is? And essentially, my position as a CEO who started as an entry-level employee is one where it's in my best interest, we'll say, to be able to train people to do things at a higher level of efficiency, to keep up with the change that's needed in order to make sure that things fall through the cracks less, and just to be more productive and adaptable to change overall. Because if we're, at G Squared, every single person starts at the bottom and works their way up. And so we're all walking a similar path, or we're all climbing a similar ladder, so to speak. And so in doing that, you need to set as tools or skill sets to be able to, achieve new levels and break through, old plateaus and things like that. And a part of the separation is hard skill sets and soft skill sets. And
Gotcha.
so hard skill sets are task management, when to be where and how to do these things. And then you've got soft skill sets, which are like, how do I deal with people? How do I navigate through this situation? And we've got things that we do along those lines. But what I've found in my experience is that more often than not, people have ways to get stuff done, but it's never, to this point, it hasn't been standardized.
I think that's a great way of saying it. It's that standardization.
So before we get into standardization, just for those who weren't aware, we forgot to start the cameras and got up, and then also had the idea that we need to talk about ourselves. And I do have something I want to share this week that I know that Charlie Apigian will like. I have recently purchased some toe spreaders in an effort to combat bad feet in 20 years.
I was not expecting that to be your way to go. So wait a minute. All right. So
you asked me how the past week has been.
Yeah. I think sometimes we go way too much into the topics right away. And, with a guest, we can't chit chat, but we're now going to be regular, right? We're now in season 2, and we're not recording these 4 months in advance or anything. This is going to be on a regular schedule. So I see nothing wrong with this. So, I'm somebody, of course, that's a runner, and I care a lot about, my lower extremities and things like that. What did you just say?
So I got some toe spreaders.
Toe.
Yeah.
I thought you said toast at first. I'm like, toast spreaders. This is an electric way to put something on a piece of toast.
I would like to be that fancy someday, but today I'm only fancy enough to spread my toes out. Or actually, I'm not, and that's why I bought the toe spreaders. Is because I've traditionally worn too narrow for me shoes my entire life.
Okay.
And so my big toe is pushed in, and that leads to bunions as far as I understand. I'm not to that point yet, but I will be if I keep on this road. And my pinky toe is jammed underneath my fourth toe, whatever that one's called.
Yeah.
Who knows? This little piggy went to market, that big one.
Okay.
This little piggy had none. That's the toe that's covering up my pinky toe.
The pinky toe.
And so I went down a YouTube rabbit hole, and because I saw it randomly put up some sort of it's like a podiatrist video, except it's like if you're going to be fit and do this, and so I watched it, and immediately I was like, do I trust this person? Because they said that you need to get toe spreaders, and then this is how your weight's distributed over your foot. Because I have weak arches, or what they call fallen arches. And so for me, my ankle can shift in and out, and that's impactful on my stride. And so I've been intentional my entire adult life about walking with straight feet. But if I turn my feet out at all, then the situation that I have would be much more pronounced.
Gotcha.
So what I found is that everybody has the same recommendations because it's so common nowadays.
Yeah.
And getting some toe spreaders. And so I've got these little silicone.
I know exactly what they are.
Okay, let's say.
You know why I think it's funny is we play the what is the something elephant game for Christmas? What's that called?
White elephant.
The white elephant game where you know everybody just passes different things and so we did it again this year. Toe spreaders are one of the gifts, and it's been like 5 years, and somebody takes the toe spreaders every year and brings it back, and it's a gift again the next year. So I know exactly what you're talking about when you say toe spreaders.
Well, they need to use them because apparently most of Americans at least have narrow shoe issues. I have wider feet as it is, and I thought I had shoes that were wide enough, but I recently found out that that's not the case either. So I bought some new shoes. I've got these toe spreaders, and my intent is to be able to use my pinky toe for balance, whereas right now it's not, and it's not a part of my locomotion. It's only a hindrance to locomotion as it stands. And you know, running for by locomotion, I mean like your stride, the actual mechanics of you moving forward, and whether it's walking, running, or whatever. And so I've been using them the past couple of days, and my toes right now are sore, but that's because they've been in positions that they haven't been in years. Because as long as I can remember, my pinky toe has been tucked in, but this is definitely pushing my pinky toe out by itself. And so not only is it lonely, but it's sore too.
So kudos to you for taking care of your feet. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Thanks. But I do have a question because I can't splay my toes. Can you do that?
Oh yeah.
Oh, see,
Really?
I feel so far behind now because, I do yoga every now and again, and every time if I'm doing we'll call it Warrior 3, which is a one-footed pose, when I lean towards my pinky toe side, I lose my balance every single time.
Well, speaking of yoga, that's one thing that I can talk about for my new year is I've always been a casual yoga goer, and I committed to actually going to hot yoga. I love hot yoga.
I was going to ask, do you do the regular hot?
I do hot for sure. I like the hot 26, and there's a reason, because those 26 poses that are part of the hot 26 sequence, plus 2 breathing exercises, I can do. And I've been perfecting it for this body for over 10 years.
So when I talk about Warrior 3, you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about. And I also can be in a Warrior 3 or what is the version in Hot 26 for over a minute.
Really?
And I can splay those feet pretty well. But I do think yoga is one of the best things that you can do. And going 2 days in a row, which is what I did last week, it was phenomenal because I was still limber the second day, and I felt like I could go that much farther.
You were able to get deeper in your poses?
And so I highly recommend going and getting that yoga membership. It's expensive, so you're going to want to go. And that's what my thing is now. I'm like, when am I going to go? Because I paid the money. I'm going to go. And I always had it at my gym where I could work out, and they had a hot yoga studio as well. But I wouldn't go because I was still getting the benefit of going and working out. And so I didn't feel like I had to. But now I'm paying the money for going here in Nashville, and I'm already noticing the benefits. But when I started doing yoga is when I noticed my ankles became stronger, my arches did not fall as much as they used to. In other words, I used to what they call overpronate. That went away, so I didn't have to get the huge support shoes anymore. And I believe a lot of it has to do with the work I've done in yoga.
That's awesome. So personally, I believe that from a longevity perspective, yoga is the best way to go.
I agree, and I'm trying to stick to that, and hopefully, because I do too much running, and then my body hurts and all that other kind of stuff. All right, should we get into? But I think this goes into perfectly with what we're talking about today, and that is we're trying to process our life. And now we have all these tools. And so what I notice in my life is I love these tools. I love them so much that I change monthly sometimes, or yearly, or I go from one task management system to another. I go from one note-taking app to another. And so I never standardize my process. I'm always changing things up because it's fun for me.
Yeah.
Most people don't have a normal system because they just probably never take the time or don't realize they should think of it in a different way.
Yeah.
So when you say standardize the processing of your data or your technology, is it more of a technology thing versus a data thing, or?
Well, the best way to think about it, and so what we're talking about is a personal process to just keep up with everything. As we, you know, we got into it, and then we switched topics for a second. Now coming back around to it, like I try to teach people how to grow, and I feel like I've been doing that for a while. And what I found is that to create a consistent experience, I have to standardize it. And so with my job, learning how to standardize a process just came, it came at one point, because if you're going to scale anything, standardization is a must. And so I'm trying to scale my personal process into something that fits for as many people as possible. But what I quickly found is that you can't say a tool is a process, right? So you've got to come up with a framework that you build the tool or you plug the tools into. And so what I mean by that is like, so you're talking about task management, and the easy example for task management is Todoist, Microsoft To Do. Wunderlist used to be the prominent app back in the day until Microsoft bought them and turned it into Microsoft To Do.
Things 3. I'm using TickTick.
TickTick. You told me about that.
Yeah, TickTick's a really good one. OmniFocus is another out there. Yeah, there's all these ones out there, and they're all they act like they're a holistic system, but they're the tool for your system. Right.
And so in this case, think about the application or the piece of software as something that plugs into a need. And so in this case, it's the need to create a list. And it doesn't have to be a to-do list, it's just a list. And we'll get into this more when we start talking about captures, like what you write down and what lists and things like that. But you don't have to use technology in these cases. And you and I have talked about this before, but I also mentor as a volunteer thing. And so one of the things, especially when I first started in 2017, there was a lot of non-tech savvy people that were trying to grow in their own company. And they were the one particular person that stands out in my mind she's the most organized analog person I've ever met in my entire life.
Okay, what do you mean by most organized analog person?
Okay, so before we get into like what my process is, her process is more complete, and it requires a notebook and a pen on you at all time.
What's a notebook? What's a pen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she has she practiced what I also practice, which is ubiquitous capture, which is that's not my idea or anything like that. That's just something that people do out there. And the idea of ubiquitous capture is that you can write anything down at any time. And on the analog side of things, it used to be I've got to have a pen and piece of paper.
Yep.
So she carried around a notebook with her for every day of the year. And so she would write things down in it every day of the year. And at the end of the year, she would go back and she would review the book with a highlighter and I don't know what you call them, but the stickers that stick out of the side that kind of bookmark stuff.
Yeah, it's the old Franklin Planner mentality. Franklin Covey, I think it ended up being that. But yeah, they came with all the big stickers, the big planner for the year.
So she could have drawn for that for sure, but she was just using plain old notebooks.
Oh, okay.
And so she would take the time every year to do that, mark it up, and then take that and then put it into a stack of notebooks. And at this point in 2017, she had been doing it for over 20 years.
Wow.
And so she could go back and review any point in time. And I adored her for all of that work. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but it was so much that I couldn't help but appreciate exactly what all she'd put into it. And I tried to compliment her as much as possible, even though I feel like she's limited because of that. Like she's got the right idea, but the fact that she was doing it in a notebook means that there's a certain amount of time that goes into it, and there's a lack of visibility that we can easily overcome using technology. For the sake of the conversation from here on out, we're going to talk about technology as it plugs into the process.
Yeah.
Or when we talk about plugging into the process it will be with technology.
And I think what you just said is very important. What she was doing was not wrong.
No.
It's just through an analog process, there's a certain barrier at some point you're going to get, which is time and effort can only go so much. So how can technology help or augment or reduce, whatever it is in that particular case, to make it where you can do what she does in an easier way so that more people can do it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of what we did was just adapt her, we'll call them antiquated processes to a new technology-based format. And so when I last talked to her, she was in the middle of transitioning a couple of pieces to more technology-based processes, and she was having a difficult time with it because she, like I said, she had been doing it for 20 years at the point where we were talking, and she was very familiar and comfortable with that process. And I don't feel like she was still growing.
Yeah.
And there was nothing wrong with what she was doing. It's just that she had a cap on how much she could do because of that. And
go ahead. I want you to make sure you finish that, but I do have a question that'll lead to that. When I think of the person out there, they're not going to have a process where they're going to go and hunt and find technology. So we're going to talk about that process today. But do you think too often people think the tool is the process? And so it's like, I'm going to start using Todoist, and whatever it tells me to do is now how I'm going to form the way I'm going to do stuff. And then in a month, they're going to stop doing it anyways.
Yeah. What I've found is that one piece of software does not exist that can do it all. Right. And we kind of hit on this in a previous podcast that we were talking to Rob, in that he uses Jira and Stand Uply. Yeah. And those are pieces of software that attempt to try to make it all work in a cohesive way where everything's coming together. And then you brought up Microsoft using their suite of services to try to do the same thing. Google's suites is trying to do the same thing. Their technology companies are rapidly racing towards we can do everything. But right now it doesn't exist. But that's not important, because what's important is that you have a workflow or a framework that exists outside of the technology that you can plug the pieces into. So do you want to jump into that?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. So as I mentioned before, like, you build a framework and then apply the technology to it in order to keep up with change, in order to keep up with your own ideas, your own tasks, your own body of work, both professionally and personally. From my perspective, although some people just apply this to their work life and then they do something completely different, or maybe nothing at all in their personal lives, because they don't look at those two things as the same. Whereas, like, I feel like if you take the time to develop yourself on one side, you might as well use it on the other side. Absolutely. Because it's a skill set that, if applied to personal life, could improve your personal life as well. And that's exactly what I've found.
Okay. So before you get into that, when you say the word framework, let's make sure that we're all on the same page with framework, because we hear process, framework, methodology, all that kind of stuff, which, whether one's different than the other, who knows?
Well, we've talked about it before with the DIKW. Yeah. Like, that's a framework. And then you have the process
to be able to achieve certain things.
Yeah. What did you call it?
Data mindset. Yeah, the data mindset process that walks you through that process, where you're right. I could see a framework being almost like the set of processes to achieve certain things. For example, like capture or processing information or storing it are all parts of that, but those are different processes within that framework. Okay.
So I guess just to, like, the best way to feel our way through the topic is just to jump right into it.
I think so.
So the way, like, I found myself in 2012-ish, underwater completely at work. I'd accepted too much work. I'd said yes to too many things. Stuff was falling through the cracks, and I was not being the best employee I could be. And my then manager took me out to eat at Jason's Deli, and then very eloquently just said, "You need to get better, or you can't work here anymore." Gotcha. And that was basically the extent of the conversation. And so I took that as a a prompt to do just that. I needed to get good, and I didn't know how. And so I started looking up time management, organization, task management, email inbox strategies, file implementation, all that kind of stuff, just in order to have an idea of what to do with each facet of of my own growth. And quickly found that paying attention to that kind of stuff really, really facilitates change and growth. And so the very first thing that I came across was Inbox Zero. And Inbox Zero now, there's like a 2007 video of where is it Marvin Mann?
Merlin Mann.
Yes. Was talking to Google about Inbox Zero, and I started following that, and I was like, well, this is a really good strategy.
Yeah.
And then I came across the concept of ubiquitous capture. And so there's a capture and a ubiquitous capture, and the only difference is ubiquitous means anywhere, anytime. Okay. And so earlier when I was talking about the example with the lady carrying the notebook, if she didn't have that notebook with her, her process was destroyed.
That's right.
And so...
And capture means I have an idea, I have a thought, I have anything.
Something crosses your brain.
Yep.
You write it down.
Okay.
And so it could be a task. It could be an idea that's fresh. It could be an idea that's adding on to previous ideas. And we'll talk about, like, when we go into the digestion piece, we'll talk about how to grow ideas through this. But it all starts with capture. And so I took that to mean the ubiquitous part of it. I took that very seriously, and I was like, okay, so I take showers, right? And then everybody in the world gets shower thoughts. Like, you're stuck in the shower by yourself, and you've like, oh, idea. And so I was like, how can I capture it truly anywhere? And so I've got, that's around when phones were starting to become water resistant with like the IP65 and stuff like that.
You were bringing the phone into the shower.
To this day, I put my phone on the seal of a window, because I got a window in my shower, and if I have an idea, I'll use the AI word, and I'll capture whatever it is that's going through my brain.
Okay, I don't get ideas in the shower anymore, and I too much about showers, but I think it's because I'm up so early. I don't think I'm up yet. When I take most showers.
That's fair.
And so I never have gotten into that habit, but I bet you're not the only.
I bet you're also taking a shower after a hard workout too.
Yes. And so I think what you're saying is people have times or activities where they have epiphanies or ideas come across. Mine will be on a run.
Okay.
And so I'll get to mine, but I want to hear your process first.
So I also have a lot of epiphanies when I'm mowing too.
Oh.
For whatever reason, I mow to dubstep. And so I'll put on the dubstep with some noise canceling headphones.
What's dubstep?
It's just a like hard, aggressive electronic music.
Oh, okay.
I
didn't know that.
Google dubstep. You'll figure it out real quick and in a hurry.
Okay.
And it's while I'm doing that, I get into like a thought zone. Like I'll have an idea, and then I'll go down that path, just kind of like daydreaming essentially. Except for I always get to a point in that daydreaming where it's like, I could do that, or maybe I should write that down. And I will literally stop the mower, or I'll pull my phone out and just type it out. But normally I'll stop the mower and talk to it, because that's just the fastest way to get it all in. And then I'll crank the mower back up and just keep on going. Same thing in the shower. I'll take a break from taking a shower, and then I will get back to the shower as soon as I've captured the stuff. And so in this case, the ubiquitous capture it's the act of capturing an idea that comes through your brain at any point in time in order to use that information later. And so you capture into what's called a bucket. And so this is where you take the tool and plug it into the framework. Okay. And so your framework calls for capture. In the beginning, I used Evernote, and then I used Google Keep, and then I used Wunderlist, and now I use To-Do. And then I've also used, in my position as a mobile expert, or whatever you want to call it, I also know how to do it on Android and iOS through the assistants as well too. Because I just had to build that. I had to build that out because I had to know how to make it work. Right.
Okay. So help everybody out. I'm gonna see this all the way through. So whether it's in a shower, on the mower, you get an idea or a thought. You say you're putting it into Microsoft To Do. is the actual, which used to be Wunderlist back in the day. That is, would you call that a list management versus a task management system?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing though. Typically, list management can, like in Evernote, when I was using that, that's when they first switched over to being able to put check boxes next to your lists and things like that. But you couldn't assign dates and times and stuff like that. And so I like lists that can have due dates and then tasks, or due dates and then reminders and whatnot. And then subtasks is a must, because I like being able to capture ideas inside of ideas.
Yeah.
If it's like when I'm mowing, for instance, if I capture one idea and then I keep on thinking about it and something else comes up in that same avenue, I'll put it in there. But that's a part of my personal process, but that's not how it has to be.
Okay. So
as long as you're writing it down, that's all that matters.
All right. I want to get the idea of what you would stop the mower to do, or not stop, because if you're being able to dictate in, you don't have to stop a lot of times. So it's, I need to get this done. So that's something that you think about. And so I need to send this person an email or whatever it is. That's a task of some sort. What about, I haven't watched 48 Hours like we talked about in the last episode with Rob. And would you put that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, so I've got lists that I keep for movies, restaurants, drinks, shows, like all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so we also talked about the browse, or browsing for an hour and a half. Like I'll browse for a while, then I'll remember that I have the lists, and then I'll go check the lists. And then sometimes I'll pull something from it, and sometimes I'm just like, I don't feel like watching any of these things. But I use it to kind of help me out, because I capture, and this is after a long period of time, but if you make a recommendation to me, I'll say this recommendation recommended by such and such, with the intent that if I ever watch it or, go to the restaurant or whatever, then I let you know how it went and all that kind of stuff. And so it helps me be more complete, I guess is a good way to put it.
Yeah, and I've started doing that because, again, I'm making a transition to live in Nashville. And so people are saying, have you been to this restaurant? And I'm like, oh, gosh. And so I quickly will put that into a list. So now I've got the lists of the restaurants I want to go to, the books I should read, all of those different things, which I didn't do that in the past. That's more of a recent thing for me.
That's a good point you make there. So whether you've always done it or not is not important, but now specifically, if I make a recommendation to you and you don't immediately write it down, and when I say you, I mean like anybody I talk to. If you don't immediately write it down, I just assume you're not going to do it.
That's right. Yeah, for sure. And it's not because I don't want to. It's I'll literally get in the car after having a conversation with you. And go, I don't remember what I was supposed to remember. And that's why ubiquitous capture is so important. There are people that I know keep notepads next to their bed because they'll wake up, or some people, there's times where I've sat there for 30 minutes because I can't. You're just awake and thoughts are going through your mind. And have you ever put in a note while being in bed? I definitely have.
Yeah. So one of the benefits of capture, and so let me take a step back and just try to tie all this in. It's like like, why are we talking about that in a data podcast? Is because the capture is the product of creating your own data.
Yep.
And so you've mentioned before that data is an imperfect image of the world, and so that's how I look at capture. It's like I'm creating an imperfect image of what I need to do, but in this case, it's good enough for me to be able to live off of. And I also kind of envision it as like, you know how dream catchers are supposed to be above your bed and stuff? It's like a dream catcher and ubiquitous capture have the same intent, because they're supposed to keep away the bad dreams. They're supposed to protect you, shield you from like negativity and whatnot. And ubiquitous capture does the same thing. And so for me, it's not in the morning, it's at night, laying in the bed. I'm like, oh yeah, I've got to email this to my CEO or my COO. I hope I remember it. And that's so if I'm take that position, then that's a stressor that's literally living in my brain, because if I don't remember it, then I forget about it, and then I lose potential progress. Maybe it's important, maybe it costs the company, maybe who knows. And that is stress. And so I can tell you from personal experience that if you take the time to write it down, and so for me, it's all about doing it as quickly as possible. And so throughout the years, I've always kind of gravitated towards like, how fast and accurate can I be? And so right now it's just, I triple tap the back of my phone and it pulls up, and immediately I can dictate to it.
And it's bringing up Microsoft To Do? Okay.
Yeah. I built a shortcut in iOS that allows me to do that. But then if I'm ever in a pinch, I can just tell SIRI or Google, and that's fine too.
Yeah, because I do it by being able to say, hey, you person, which is, again,
And that's that's completely fine. The importance is that it's quick. And so like, you're laying in the bed at night, you type that in, you can let it slide out of your brain, because you got it taken care of, because there's, we'll get into it in just a second, but there's additional steps to the personal workflow or the framework that require you to go check on those lists that you've created.
Yeah, and I think, and we're going to go through this framework, but the most important step is this one.
It is, and it's the most disciplined too.
Yeah, and there's reasons why. It's not just because you're trying to get stuff done. You mentioned it. It's also because it relieves that stress of, oh my gosh, I got to remember that. I mean, how many people are driving home and get this great idea, but if you don't have a way to hands-free enter it into a list, you're gonna forget it by the time you get home, and so then you freak out about it. I mean, there used to be a thing where people would write on their hands and or tie a string around their finger. I mean, there was the analog ways back in the day. I think that is so important to think about. Is if I get it somewhere, I don't have to process it at that moment.
Right.
And that's the important. If there's people out there that understand the GTD method, the getting things done, it's the same thing. It's throw everything into an inbox and then process it later. And that's what you're saying is your ubiquitous capture.
Yeah, but ubiquitous capture is a discipline, and that's the thing that I need to impress upon as many people as will listen, is that living in the digital age with rapid change is effort. And there's nothing you can do about it.
It's such discipline. So I have to ask this question because I'm bad at this. And the reason I'm bad at it is because I put those thoughts in like 7 different places based on the day. I'll put it into Craft, which is a note-taking app, because I'm thinking that's more of a long-term thing. And so I'm trying to process it before I should.
Sure.
There's an app that's actually really good for this. It's called Drafts. Drafts. I think it's got an S on it, but it literally, you just open it up and it's ready for you to dictate right into it or to type into it. And then it's got URL hooks to all the apps out there. It does a great job. Apple Notes could be your place, but I think it's important at this point to specify you believe you should put everything in one place.
A bucket. And that's
a bucket.
Yeah, if you look up
tool. One tool. So in other words, because I've got a task management system, and I could say, well, every time I come up with a task, I put it there. But every time I have a note, I want to put it over here, and that's where I get myself into trouble.
Yeah, it's so for me, and I've been right where you are, because I've tried the idea of putting it where it goes just to start with, to kind of skip the digestion step. But in doing so, I bifurcate everything in a way that I just can't keep up with, and then I'll wind up missing things, and that defeats the whole purpose to begin with.
Yeah.
And so I do think that like whatever tool you use, and so I use To Do, and if you use any kind of task manager, just create a list called Capture, and that's your default bucket.
And most have one called Inbox.
Yeah, Inbox. Like
Todoist has Inbox. Things 3 has it. OmniFocus, because they believe in the they follow the GTD method.
Yeah. So anything that has a standard inbox or location, just use that by default. Like, you don't have to get fancy with it in the beginning. Just do something and try to make it consistent. But the discipline comes in that when you have that idea, pick up your phone or tell the assistant to remind you to do this at some point if that's where your bucket is. And then that leads to the second step, which is the digestion, which we'll get to in a minute. But one of the things that I wanted to point out about the capture process specifically is it's the beginning to this whole thing. None of this works without capture.
Yeah.
And if you're not capturing, then you're building stress in your life. But then I've also found that, like, you know, I've experienced burnout a couple of times in my professional career. Capture is the behavior that gets me out of the hole. Because everybody becomes apathetic at some point. But if you're like me, then it can become a self-defeating cycle where apathy leads to a lack of production, and then the lack of production makes you feel like a piece of crap for not being productive and all this other kind of stuff. And then it's a downward spiral. So for me, just the act of capturing, even if I don't do the rest of the process, knowing that I put it somewhere and that I can go back and get it at some point, it's the start of the positive traction.
Okay.
And then going back and actually getting to it at some point and seeing all of that stuff there makes me feel better about myself. And then it gets me out of the hole.
Is that different than journaling?
It is. Journaling is completely different for sure.
Okay.
And so like I do plan on talking about journaling, but more towards the end, because journaling is you can capture from journalism.
Journaling?
Yeah, journaling.
Yeah.
You can capture from journaling because I have ideas that I highlight and pull out of it all the time. But I feel like it's its own exercise.
Okay, because one thing, the only time I use pencil and paper, which is actually my Apple Pencil on my iPad using GoodNotes, is when it's almost like my journaling, but it's my planning for the week. And on Mondays, I want to what are my big events? What are my 5 or 3 main things I'm working on, and I have to write that part out. But all of the ubiquitous capture that you're talking about, I don't need to write down that much. That's not that to me can be through a Microsoft To Do or a Drafts or an Apple Note.
As far as what to write, you want to make sure, and so I've leaned too far in both directions on this, but you want to make sure you write down enough that when you go back and read it later, you're like, what the hell was I talking about?
I did one today. What was it? Oh, it says we end, and it was supposed to be send.
Okay.
And it just, like you also have to watch out, that, because if you're either, and this was me typing it, and I must have hit a W first instead of an S. And it came out of the blue. So you also have to know what it says when you do it. So you should probably look at it if you can.
Check on it.
Yeah, for sure.
I definitely, that's a consistent throughout. I don't think you can ever really get away from it, because sometimes when you're capturing, you really are stopping everything to write down an idea. And sometimes that's awkward.
Yeah.
But I find it to be worthwhile. And I'll excuse myself if I'm in front of people. I'm just, hey, let me write this down real quick, otherwise I won't forget. And most people will be like, oh, that's completely fine. That actually, I've experienced a lot of positivity from that, because it shows that I'm making an effort to remember the thing that they just said, or I'm looking to follow up in a way that, like I said earlier, if I tell you something and then if I suggest something, you don't write it down, I'm just assuming you don't care.
Yeah, and I've done this many times where somebody say, you should read this book. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I'll get out an app and write that down. I almost think that's complimenting the person.
Same.
And so I think that there's no shame in that, because there's no way I'll remember the author and the book, and the title and everything, or even the subject once I go home.
I mean, statistically, you're not supposed to. One mention, you're not supposed to be able to remember that.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So I feel kind of good about capture. So basically, it's okay for anybody to figure out whatever they feel is important to come back to, basically, is something. So, whether it's restaurants, books, emails, I'll even put in, I've done this a lot recently because I feel like I have a lot of people to thank. I'll just say, send a thank you note to this person. And I may not do that this week.
Yeah.
But I want to get it in somewhere so that I can go, oh, that's right. John Smith, I wanted to send them just a, hey, thanks for your help last quarter with that project or whatever it was.
I'll do that with like social media posts. I'll have an idea for something that I want to put on the internet, and then I'll write it down.
Well, speaking of that, you have a podcast. You have creative things that you do. Do you capture when you might have an episode idea or something like that?
So during the recording of the last episode, when we were talking to Rob, he brought up a few good points, and I literally wrote it down on the spot because I wouldn't remember otherwise. I mean, I could go back and listen to it, but then that's like I'd have to take the time when I'm just right here and I can get it done. And now I'm going to take that. I'm going to use that to go explore on my own because there was just new topics and ideas that he brought up, and I enjoyed that.
All right. So before we go into the digestion part, what are some quick tips on capture or good guidelines? I think the one is use the same tool for all capture is one. Any other? Does saying them versus typing them, does it matter?
It's
both?
Whatever you're more comfortable with.
Okay.
You as the individual need to decide what you're comfortable with based off of how likely you are to do it. And so the only time I've ever gotten into a situation where I've made myself do one or the other is when I'm not capturing. So I'm less likely to capture if I have to type it out.
Yeah.
But that's me personally. Some other people may not want to voice dictate because the very first few times you pull out your phone, like say you've got a new idea. When you go to dictate that idea verbally for the first time, especially when you're under the pressure of like, if I don't speak for a certain amount of time, the assistant's going to cut me off. And so I wound up saying stupid stuff. And so that's a practice thing for me that I've had to get past. It also helped me with my articulation, like right out of the gate, because if I'm having to, if I'm having to write down something that is cohesive, then I've got to, and I'm doing it for the first time verbally, like right after having the idea, like that's a skill. But I could see writing it down. And some of these things may take some time to get them out, but it's important to get them out because there's not a standard way to build ideation, but we're all capable of it.
Yeah.
And so just whatever's consistent in your life is what you should do.
Yeah, I do think everybody should take the time to get good at dictation. It's winter, and my hands are cold. I actually have incredibly cold hands all the time. It's actually, I'm going to see a doctor about because it's what's called Raynaud's phenomenon. Do you ever hear of that? And it's hopefully not going to be an issue, but I wear gloves all the time. And yes, you can type with gloves. And I could take off a glove to type and things like that. But if I could just say, hey, Apple device, and type correctly and know how a period will work, how to create a new line, how to do all of that, it will make your life easier.
Yeah. And so right now, just to kind of rank it, the latest iOS came out with some really good Siri improvements for dictation.
Yeah.
It can put punctuation in. Is it always perfect? No, not really. You still have a window of time that you can't go past. Having said that, though, the reigning champion is Google right now. Any Google Assistant stuff is going to be way better. And if you have a Pixel device, the actual recorder app in Google is the best thing ever from a dictation perspective.
Yeah, and I do use Apple almost exclusively. And the most recent update where it allows you to literally type text and speak at the same time is really good.
I like it.
Yeah, and it takes a little bit of getting used to, but I can, especially in the car. I mean, I'm in the car for 2 hours a day. Man, I'll tell you, there's definitely ideas. I'm glad that there's still ideas that happen for those 2 hours, and I'm not wasting my time the whole time. I'm dictating a lot, up to 10 notes probably, while I'm in the car.
So apart from keeping it concise while still being able to understand what you're talking about, I would say that like if you're throwing everything into a list and there's a tag you can add to it, like so you brought up the podcast stuff earlier. If I have an idea for the podcast, I'll put podcast : whatever the idea is. And so that way when I'm pulling it out, I know immediately what my intent was.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Because I keep separate creative lists and I don't want them to cross over unless I do want them to cross over. And so I'll take that captured item And then if we, when we go into digestion, and instead of moving it to my long-term notes, I just move it to our mutual notes, and I put it in that, the topic idea list, or, whatever list it could be.
So it is important to capture, and just capture. Just do it every time you have a thought, whether it's a write it down kind of thing. Just do it. You're laughing.
Well, the way you said that, it just reminds me of the Shia LaBeouf video where she's like, "Just do it," and that's exactly right. You just do it.
Just do it. Just go and capture. It is that important. But let's say we're halfway decent on that. Are we ready to move on to digestion?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so digestion isn't food in this case. It is the processing of what you've captured.
Yeah. So digestion is what I call it. You can also call it clearing the bucket. You can call it whatever you want to, but it's taking everything you put in the capture list and then prioritizing it.
Okay.
And so what I mean by prioritizing it is if it's a task, it's like, when are you going to do that task? What is that task associated with? Is it a project? Is it something more immediate? You got to pay a bill. Like, where does it go? And then it's about finding a specific time to do that. And so the way I look at it is just like inbox zero is do, defer, delegate, or delete. I just took the same three, and then except for delete, I'd put depot. Because the tasks are inherently like, once you do it, you check it off, you're done, unless it's a repetitive task. And and I like to use apps where I can set up the repetitive tasks too.
I do too.
And so I've got lists, like I keep up with all of the dates that I'm supposed to keep up with, and all of my networking through repetitive tasks that are built into lists and to do.
Yeah.
And so if it's something like that, then I'll take it from the capture bucket and move it into one of those lists. If it's if it's pay this bill, I'll go ahead and do that. Usually I take the same kind of like time frame. If it's 5 minutes or less, I'll do it. And then if it's not, then I'll defer. And for me, defer means put it on my calendar. Approximate the time it's going to take to accomplish the task, and then put it on my calendar, because if I don't put it on my calendar, I'm less likely to get to it.
Yeah.
And so that's what the defer means. And so defer, if it's, again, this is just my stuff, if it's over 5 minutes, but you may be like, if it's over 10 minutes, or if it's, as long as it's not an hour, I'm fine with doing it. I skipped the main part of clearing your bucket. Is like, clearing your bucket is a standardized time of day, and it should be on a regular cadence. So for me, every morning at 9 a.m. is my clear the bucket time.
Oh gosh, that's a great idea.
And so
I'm not consistent because my fires can start at 7 a.m. And so I cannot say 9 o'clock is.
Well,
when
you're
I
up
can
at 4:30 though, so yours could be 6:30.
Well, and last week was a week where I did not leave the house until 8. Okay, so for me that's late.
Yeah, that's basically my noon.
Yeah, and so 8 o'clock. Especially last week, because schools aren't back in really yet and all that kind of stuff. So getting to work was not bad if I left at 8 o'clock. So I did that, and those couple of hours that I got to work were just so nice. And I told my team last week, I'm like, look, starting when I move up here, even though I'm going to be that much closer, it means I'm going to not be coming into work as early, because I think I can have a better workflow of my day if I'm at home until 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And that means I could say at a certain time, so 9 o'clock for you, that would be 6 a.m. for me, might be when I could clear out the inbox.
Yeah. But that's the piece of the framework, is clearing the inbox. The how and the tools you use, all up in the air.
Yeah.
And so I use...
And you're putting it into a couple of different places then.
Yeah,
You could.
depending on what it is. So I use my calendar for the tasks that I defer, and then I use OneNote for long and short-term notes.
Okay. So to do is where you capture it, but you'll also process it into to do with dates and things like that.
If it's an easy list that requires dates, yeah.
Okay.
I don't get too complex with it. I went over, just like I went too simple. I've gone overboard with the number of lists and things like that. And eventually I took it back. Let's see, am I getting out of order? So we're talking about digestion, getting everything, putting it in a spot. And so I usually start let's talk about creating an idea. And so an idea would be this podcast. So anytime over the past, year, if I've had an idea about a podcast, I'll take it out of my bucket when I'm digesting and I'll put it in a longer list that I keep in OneNote. And then that list grows and grows and grows. And I've shown you my blog topic list, and that's years in the making. It's super long at this point. But the podcast list grows not until it grows because it's on its own, because there's enough ideas coming in. Otherwise, I would just keep it in a general list. And so I usually take the approach now that if I'm getting too many items in a general list, I break it out into its own list. And then I start to grow it independently. It doesn't mean I'm doing anything with it yet other than adding to it, but I've got it. It's got its own space. And so I had too many areas, and then I started losing track of items and duplicating them and things like that. And if I'm putting things in two places because I don't know where it goes, it's too much. And we'll get to that when we're talking about note taking, because revision in notes is boring and it's work, but there's no way around it that I know of.
I got to ask a couple of questions to clarify a couple things, and I'm going to go back to capture a little bit.
Okay.
But to keep on this thread right now, what if it's something like you have to send a proposal to somebody, and it's going to take 30 minutes, and you just don't feel like doing it right at that moment. You don't have the capacity at 9 a.m. You've got 18 other things you got to get done, or whatever it is. You're going to take that. If it's a 30-minute chunk or something that has to get done, you're going to put on your calendar. Okay. Because I think that's very important. That's your way of doing it. A lot of, I actually just listened to a podcast a week ago that was task management system versus calendaring. And you're talking about hyper calendaring then.
For me, that's how it works. Because so here's why. In my particular case, is like, you ever heard of the concept of the whirlwind? I've mentioned it briefly in other podcasts.
Elaborate. Go ahead.
So there's a concept in the workplace called the whirlwind, and it exists outside of it. It's just named in the workplace because you're supposed to be productive and all that kind of stuff all the time. But the whirlwind is like, I come in with the intent to do X, Y, and Z, and then somebody walks through my door 5 minutes after I get there, and they're like, "Hey, this thing happened. I need help."
Yeah.
And so when they say that, all of your prioritization for the day flies out the window. And so for me, if I don't have it on the calendar, if I don't have a hard stop or a way to say, like, I've got to throw the brakes on this, and then, or I've got to just actively determine the priority of this thing that you brought to see if it's more than that, then it just leads me to make better decisions when I've got to combat with something on my calendar. You could put it in a list as long as you're good at checking that list. But for me, I live off my calendar during the workday.
So I do like lists. I like lists. And I told you I use TickTick right now as my task management system. The biggest thing for that is recurring for me and so I never miss a payment, because I've got everything that I have to, every utility I have that if it's due on the 25th, it comes up on the 20th to pay it, things like that. I also process email that way. So I'm going to go back. So when you get an email that you have to do something about, how do you capture that?
Well, so then I just I just defer back to the inbox zero thing, because it's the same principle.
So inbox zero literally means your inbox will be nothing once you've processed it.
Yeah, my inbox is nothing.
Okay. See,
and the way I do that,
I can't keep up with that.
Well, so a lot of people will use their inbox, or what they leave in their inbox, as their task list. And for me, that gets really messy.
Yeah.
Especially with being a CEO, because the types of emails I keep in there, they're not all action based. Some of them are thought based. And I have to consider things more, because sometimes I have a decision that I have to make that could be detrimental to the company if I make the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And so I've set time aside to be able to reflect and things like that. It doesn't always have to be a task, basically. But having said that, I do put it on the calendar. So if I get to an email and I at the beginning of the year I got down to zero. And here we are, 8 days later, and I probably got 50 in my inbox again. But I got down to zero, and so what I do is if I've got, I treat my inbox just like I do my bucket. And so if it's less than 5 minutes, I'll take care of it. If it's more than 5 minutes, I'll calendar it. And so all I do is I literally, and I'm using Outlook for this, is I'll drag it down to the calendar icon, let it go. And when I do that, it pops up, and then I'll leave myself a note like, do this time, or follow up with this task at this time.
Wow.
Because I don't like living out of my inbox or out of my capture bucket throughout the day, or any kind of task list for that matter. But I like having that to set the pace for the day. And so if I push an item because it turns out that the fire I'm putting out is more important, then I know that I'll go into the calendar and I'll just move it down to an open spot. Because if I don't actively manage my time, I'm not going to succeed, period.
Yeah, and there's a lot of merit to that. I know a lot of people like to take emails, and so I can forward an email to TickTick, and then it automatically goes into that inbox, and then I can process it. Especially if it's something that's like 3 months from now, I need to do, but you could just as easily put it on your calendar in 3 months, just like you said.
So there is a problem with that going so far out. In that if you're not actively, and this is why it works out for me, is because I do actively plan my day with my calendar. And so normally when I'm putting something on the calendar for the day, or when I'm putting on something on the calendar from my bucket, it's not going into today because I should already have today planned out.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does if I've got the time, but more often than not, it's going in tomorrow, or, if I've got a block of 2 hours on Thursday or something like that. And so I personally use it. But like I said, if you can successfully use just regular old lists, like To Do, for instance, has a My Day feature.
Yeah,
so
I like
you plan
that.
it out. And then I tried doing this for a while, but it just got too messy for me. Where if you've got it scheduled and it's due today, or it's been due already and you just haven't done it, or if it's due tomorrow, you click on My Day and then it makes all these suggestions based off of due date. And then you can just go plus, 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 and then you've got your daily task list. Except for me, I have to take it the extra step and visualize the time that goes into it. Because if there's 8 items in that task list, if I do them serially, meaning I just start at the top and go down, I could be jacking up my day.
Yeah. And so, so a place to capture, that's one, that could be a tool. You use calendaring, and you're probably just living in the Outlook world. We don't want to go deep dive into all the different apps in calendaring. I use one called Fantastical, which I love.
I love Fantastical on the iPad.
Yeah, I use it on every one of my devices. Love it on my iPhone especially, and I've been using it since I was using it before it had a Mac app. I've been using it forever. So you have a way to calendar.
Just so everybody knows, he just flexed his Apple cred.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
By saying he's been using Calendly before.
Not Calendly,
Fantastical.
That's right.
Before Apple picked it up.
Well, no, it was a menu item. You could be part of your menu. That's what it started out as. And so it would be in the menu bar, and you'd click on it, and it would only show up there, but it was never an actual app on your computer. And so, gosh, that was, I don't know if it was Fantastical 2 when it finally became that, and then of course it became a subscription service, blah, 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 blah. But anyways, there's the calendaring thing. Other people might have their own task management system that's different than from what they capture. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That is perfectly fine. And then of course you mentioned even, long-term and short-term notes. So I'm seeing 4 different types of tools. They could be combined together. But that's what I'm seeing right now. So, am I missing anything at this point for what we've covered?
No.
Okay.
No, just so a list app. And so all of this could be done in OneNote, to be true, or to be fair, or Evernote, or
True.
Google Suites, or whatever, because you just need the ability to write something down.
Yeah.
And then how you do it past that is all up to you.
I had another CEO of a company. This is about probably 2018, I think, is when he told me this. He lived in OneNote, and every day his tasks for the day, he would just have them as little checkboxed lists. And if he didn't get it done, he moved it to the next one. And so every day of the year was a note.
I've tried that method before,
Yeah.
but it got really messy for me.
Well, you know what app does that really well? It's called, it is Craft. Craft is, it's kind of newer to Apple. I think it's only on Apple, but it's kind of a, another note-taking app.
Craft with a K or a C?
C. And it has a daily note. And that was one where I started getting used to, like the couple of things. pick up something from the store or do that. I don't need to put that into a task management system, and I don't want to put that on my calendar, but I just want to remember, okay, what am I supposed to do at the end of the day? And that was what I was putting in there. And I was being pretty consistent there. The only problems I had with that one is it was a little bit hard to capture. And that was my thing. So I would try to capture somewhere else and then create a little hook to be able to put into the daily one, but it wasn't working perfectly.
Well, that's where the digestion would come into play. Is that if you have that hook built into the process, or to the framework, then you're not going to miss it. And so it's about being disciplined with pulling stuff out. However, unless it's time sensitive, that's not as important as capturing, but it's still a part of the workflow.
Okay, so in the digestion part, I see that if it doesn't take long, just get it done. If you're deferring it, you're putting it onto your calendar. Others might, again, just there's nothing wrong with keeping that that task management system, and and I do a little bit of both. I would like to get better at calendaring. One of the problems I have now with calendaring, which is not a problem, but I need to get better at dedicated time for myself. It's because in the past, if it was just open, that was my dedicated time.
You mean focus time, right?
Focus time, yeah. But now I have somebody else that manages my calendar, and that person does an amazing job. And so if I need to set up a monthly with Charlie Yielding, right, or something like that, this person helps me with that. But then they'll put things in spots where I'm like, oh, I wanted that to be my time because that's, I'm teaching that night or whatever it is.
So to jump into that, that's your responsibility to block that out beforehand.
That's a statement, not a question, right? I agree. And and that's what I'm starting to do. So Friday afternoons now say no meetings.
There you go.
And I want to do that for Wednesday mornings too, because Wednesday night I'm now teaching a class for the next 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So yes, so I need to change the way I've been doing my calendar to have dedicated, blocked off times for me time.
Yeah, especially when somebody else is just throwing stuff in, because more often than not, they're just looking for blank time.
Yeah, and if you're in a larger company where you have Outlook as your email and calendar, people can see when you're available. And so if you don't want to be available, block it off.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important to do. In academics, we are required to have office hours a lot of times. So it was something we had to do anyways, because students might stop by, things like that. And I got out of that habit because I wasn't a professor with dedicated office hours for classes anymore, because I was doing the whole, data collaborative thing. So got away from it, but I'm definitely getting back to it. So what else about digestion, or I want to make sure we get everything here.
Well, you hit on something that's really important. Is we're talking about habit building. And so habits ebb and flow. And if you stop, that's if any part of this breaks, that's fine. But always start with the capture part. In your rebuilding of the habit, because I've dropped this habit 2 or 3 times over the past decade. Just from burnout and stuff like I was talking about earlier, and I've been able to rebuild it because I've got it framed out.
I like that. And I think it's important to say this, and this is, I want to bring this up because it changed 36 students' lives when you came and spoke. So this, we mentioned, I think it was in episode 10, when the great experience I had in my one class in the fall of 2022, and which was basically just happened. But that experience was great for me. Well, I think you were the first person that came. And you came, I think, on the first day of our podcast being live. Yep. So it was our big coming out day. And you sat down and we had a conversation for an hour and 10 minutes. What they loved about that day the most was that you were a human being. Here is a CEO coming to our class, and you come in and you talked about your workflow. You talked about capture. You talked about how you fall off the wagon, but it's okay. And so these 36 students that day said, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one? And a CEO has the same issues that I have. And so I bring all that up to say, I bet there's days where you don't do it perfectly.
No, there's a lot of those days.
It's more the norm than it is, I feel there's more days where I do it poorly than I do it okay, but that doesn't mean stop.
Right. So the way I look at it, just in general, is that there's two different trajectories we can take. Right. Let me take a step back first.
Okay.
First, I believe that anybody can do anything that they want, and that's something that I live by. And
so I can be an opera singer. Doesn't mean a good one though. Yeah, you just said I can be one.
You can sing opera, but and maybe you could be an opera singer. You know what I'm getting at, though. Like for the most part, there are natural talents. Like not everybody's going to be a Michael Jordan,
sure.
Or a Shaq or anything like that. But you can get as good as you possibly can, and within the normal bounds of expectations or boundaries of expectations, you can be really good at just about everything. The top 1% of the top 1%, maybe not. Like I'm never gonna 360 whirlwind between my legs dunk, and that's fine. I just got to live with that. But I can do tons and tons of other things, and this helps facilitate that.
Yeah.
And so I see every day as taking a step. Mm-hmm. And so my trajectory is like, if you imagine a line cut through the air at 45 degrees, my growth is on that kind of path. It's never straight up and it's never straight down. But within that path, there's an oscillation. So there's ups and downs. Mm-hmm. And so 10 years ago when I was starting, my floor for capacity was way lower than it is right now. And even right now, 10 years later, when I'm at my current floor, I'm still way better than I was 10 years ago because I've got all this stuff that I'm sitting on that makes it easier. So I've got the framework that I've built onto that I can, like it, unless I just completely throw it in the garbage and don't do anything with it, then I'm still growing in some ways. I'm still growing because I'm capturing the ideas. And so if I want to write a book, I just capture those ideas over a 10-year period. There's nothing to say that I had to write a book 10 years ago or that I can't write a book 10 years from now.
Yeah.
But if I have ideas about it, I can capture those ideas and grow those over time on my own, or based off my own interests and stuff.
Yeah. And so let's say you go 2 days, a week goes by, mm-hmm. and you just did terrible at capturing. Mm-hmm. Monday's a new week.
It is, and sometimes getting in my own head, like I said before, it can be a negative cycle.
Yeah.
But the second and this has become easier with time too, and experience, is that the second that I understand where I'm at, I look right at capture and I say, okay, let's do this. Yeah. And so I make sure that, instead of just letting that thought cross through my brain and go back out into the ether, I pick up my phone and I write it down. Mm. And that one little step is traction that I can measure that then turns my whole mindset back into something more positive and gets me to the point to where I'm digesting stuff and I'm capturing ideas for long-term storage and stuff. And then that gets us into the actual long-term notes and lists part of this.
Yeah, and so we want to get there. I will just mention one last thing on digestion. If dates intimidate people, because mm-hmm. they do. A lot of people don't like putting dates on things because they never meet those dates. And in that case, something that I've gone to that has really helped me out is I try to get things done in a week. Mm-hmm. If I've taught classes, usually it's a once per week or twice a week kind of thing. Mm-hmm. If I'm doing things, it's always based on a week. So I will put things as this week, next week.
That's a good idea.
To be scheduled. And those are my three things. Or I have one called parked, which is your depot, right? Which mm-hmm. means if it's parked, that means I want to do it one day. It's where my lists go. Mm-hmm. And I just, one day I'll get to it. I want to add an addition to my home, but it ain't going to be in the next 2 years. But I've got 3 ideas for it. Mm-hmm. Boom, put it there, and I put it in the parked spot. But I like to think of everything as this week, next week, or beyond. Mm-hmm. So you can simplify things down. It's okay if you don't have to put Tuesday and then Thursday and then different things unless you like that. Like because that to do or that today mentality of like Microsoft To Do or Todoist or OmniFocus, they have the today feature and it will pop up that way. What I do is I just tag it with this week. Mm-hmm. And then I have a list that comes up based on those tags in my task management. And that seems to work for me. When I went to that, then Mondays were the day I looked at what I wanted to get done during the week. Mm-hmm. Fridays were the day I reviewed what I got done. and it allowed me to feel freer for the weekend, and that was more important to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So okay. I think we've gone pretty well so far. We have captured different things, put it into our bucket. We have cleared our bucket, but not everything is going to be a task of some sort. Some things will be different notes, and that's what you were talking about with short-term and long-term notes.
Yeah, I mean, you just hit on it with your ideas for a renovation that you're not even close to doing. Some things don't have a date. They don't have to. And I feel like that's like you bringing that up is very valuable because there's an expectation that if you have an idea, you have to act on it in order for it to be valid, and that's just not true. What you really have to do for it to be valid is just capture it and hold on to it and make sure that when you need it, it's there. And so that's where the long-term notes comes. For me, that's how it works. And so I'd separate long-term notes into two separate things. Like one is active and one is passive. And so every long-term note starts off as passive lists.
Okay.
And so as I was mentioning earlier, as one list gets long enough, like if one list has enough of one type of topic in it, I'll break that topic out. And so, parenting in the digital age is one of the things that I'm passionate about. And so I've got a list that's just got a bunch of stuff about that, but I've not really sat down and brainstormed about it. But if I'm having a good conversation with somebody who knows, then I'll draw ideas from that and write them down and put them in there. And I'm not doing anything with it right now, but that doesn't mean that at some point I can't decide, okay, I'm going to turn these into active notes. And active notes for me are notes that you currently work out of. Uh-huh. And so, again, that's a piece that's just me. The long-term storage is the framework piece. And so you need a tool to help you hold on to long-term storage.
Okay.
And OneNote is that tool for me. And you can use Evernote, you can use Google Keep, you can use anything, or Apple Notes or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Craft is,
or Craft.
Something more specialized in that going. Yeah.
And so I take those ideas and then, like I said, I categorize them. And then I can't remember if this is before we started recording or not, but revision is a big part of long-term notes. And so what I mean by that is like it's really easy on notes that you're keeping up with for 10 years to get messy.
Yeah.
And so every so often I have to go through and I have to revise all my notes. And so my earlier example for the lady that used the analog best practice ever, she had an annual time that she would sit down and review her notebook, pull all of the insights out of it, and then set it down. And so I do the same thing, but just with my digital notes, in that I go in, I organize them, I make sure that the ideas are still cohesive and still should be grouped together.
Yeah.
And then I go from there. And that's twofold. It helps keep me up to date with like the stuff that I'm keeping up with and how much stuff I actually like generated this past year. And then it also helps me like better coordinate the ideas and into an easily shared or interactable format. I don't know how the best way to say that, but I can get to what I want quickly, right?
Yeah, and going to the idea of long-term capture. So when you say long-term, that doesn't mean it's a long-term project. This is a note that you're going to add to forever kind of stuff, or could add to.
Well, so the best example for this is like I intend to teach this to my kids, and I've already started with my son because he's 11 on some of the basic principles of this. But imagine that you were 13 and you had the skill sets to build ideas over a lifetime. When you're 13, you have some fantastic ideas, and then our adult selves usually put those things down in lieu of like engaging with, I'm using quotey fingers here, but with reality.
Yeah.
But I reject that wholeheartedly. I think that a 13-year-old can come up with an idea that 13-year-old's adult self can finish. And so through building these ideas over time, they have the skill sets to hold on to like all those little minute things that they thought about over the years. And then they're, at some point you got to face the cringe because not everybody would want to go back and read what their 13-year-old self said, but you're also iterating these or you're revising the notes year over year. And so you're keeping up with your current self while holding on to that 13-year-old's idea.
Nice. Yeah. So you just convinced me on doing an episode on parenting in the digital age, because not that I needed convincing, but that that's mind blowing to think about that. Like, think about, I don't know what ideas I had at the age of 13, but what if I captured them?
What if you did? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Even if I just wrote down, we were, it's funny as this is, I was at my parents' just a little bit
This past week, right?
this past week, and my mom we were trying to get rid of. So what she was doing is every time she got an email, she would print it off and then read it because she couldn't read from her screen. So now she feels comfortable finally reading from her screen. She's gotten pretty good at using an iPad. We're keeping everything digital, and so she's going through all this stuff. And then she found her like a journal from when I was born.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was literally, we have brought Charlie into the world. I was 9 pounds, 13 ounces.
It's a big baby.
My mom went through 19 hours of labor. And let me tell you, she wrote down her feelings.
Oh, I bet.
And said some different things. And it was like, and I will never go through that again. And they had decided I was the last one. They only wanted 2 kids, and they had their 2 kids. And she wrote it down. She didn't remember ever writing that. She didn't remember those thoughts. She forgot so much of what she had written down, but she wrote it down. She captured it.
Yeah.
And so because she did that, now the thought of that, the journaling aspect of it, all of that I think goes into the notes here. So tell me more about how you do short-term and long-term notes.
So you just brought up an example. And one of the things that I found out when I had kids is that, like, most parents experience having small children as a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
Which means that our brains immediately try to forget it. It's like if I ever go climb a mountain, it's really crappy climbing the mountain. I have fond memories of it after the fact.
Sure.
But if you're like, do you remember exactly how much pain you were in at 14,000 feet? I'd be like, it was a lot, but over time, like, and when you're first done with it, you're like, oh yeah. 6 months later, you're like, I could probably do it again.
Yeah.
But I listened when they said that, or when they said, like, I don't remember, it was just a blur and stuff. And I started writing stuff down. And so I have been capturing through my kids' lives those small little moments of, like, that made me happy at the time. And so I'm just going to go in here and grab one of these. So in 2015, my kid loved dinosaurs, and Jurassic World is his favorite movie. I took him to see it in theaters when he was 3, and I must have seemed like a bad father because it was pretty intense. Let's see, hang on. But he loved the movie, and so far we've watched it twice. And that's just like that's a very innocuous situation. But
that is a text note, correct?
it's just a text note that
Okay.
I captured and I put in long-term storage, because sometimes long-term storage is just for me.
Yeah.
It's for me to walk through my own past.
And it doesn't have to just be text, right?
It doesn't. Nope.
Remember, I talked about my day one usage. He's Charlie's showing me that he actually added a picture to his where he's with his son. I exclusively journal through pictures. I don't need to type if I have the picture. I remember the experience. I could smell the air if we're off of the ocean. I can go back to that, and I will not go back and read. I won't.
Yeah.
So for me, my long-term notes is basically curating a journal of images.
Yeah.
And so that is a great example. What about, so I've got probably my biggest thing right now in terms of notes is things I want to buy.
I've got a buy list.
And I've got things I want to buy now, where, I just think about, oh shoot, I want to get a new iPad cover because I want one without a keypad. Because I seem like I'm writing 99% of the time with my iPad. I never use the keyboard. So I just want to put that down. And if I do that, then when I'm sitting there going, it's fun to go buy that kind of stuff.
What can I spend money on?
What can I spend money on? That kind of thing. But also, I love it when I can share my notes because my wife and I now are creating the list for our new home. And, it's little things like, I want a mini fridge. Because we got one of those tall skinnies that we're about ready to move into, which is 3 levels. And I want to do most of my work on the third level. That means I need a mini fridge up there,
You
darn
don't have
it.
to go all the way down.
And it has to have ice in it. And, so she found one that was better than one that I found. And so we're sharing lists just as much. Is yours, are any of your notes shared with others?
Yeah.
Through OneNote?
Well, so
We know how fun it is to share notes in OneNote.
So I do a lot of sharing in OneNote. That started from work, and so the majority of my sharing is done. Well, Office 365 is really changing a lot of that stuff, and so we use To Do Some.
Who's we? Is this
We
family?
is in work.
Okay.
So most of my sharing is done with work. My wife and I share an Apple list.
And that's where we do it too.
I will say that so my wife's not bought into the discipline like I am. And so I'll put stuff in there and then it'll come up that's like, okay, well, what about this? And I was like, well, it's in the list. And then she'll start putting stuff in there, but then I've forgotten that she's actually like in the list. And
Sounds like our Christmas list this past year.
My wife and I have drastically different opinions or perceptions of technology and its uses and stuff. And so more often than not, I'm dragging her through like some new thing where we put Google in the house, and so she's like begrudgingly dealing with it. But then also she keeps a check on me so I don't go overboard as well, because I start to get fired up about it and the potential that can come out of using technology in like positive ways. And she's just like, yeah, but then let's focus on what's in front of us right now. And I'm like, okay, fine.
And she's right.
Yeah.
Darn it. I think we can go too far down that rabbit hole. Yeah. And I feel like I'm bringing my spouse along too. And I think it's important to meet them somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And I'm not ready. I'm not ready to do that either. I want her to have, to be using 1Password like I do. I want her to, now the one that we do very well with is we use Any List. That's what it's called, Any List. And it's only meant for shopping. And so we use that for groceries.
Okay.
And it's phenomenal. We also use Amazon for our lists. We put things in our wish list really well together. So there's different places you can put lists. It's not just some repository somewhere or,
right. But so that all comes back to Capture though, because if you have the idea and you can go into Amazon and add it to your Amazon wish list, that's fine. But if you're not, then you just use your traditional Capture process, and then when you do the digestion, you take it and then you put it in the Amazon list. That's one of those. That's a good example of one of those 5 minutes or less things.
Yeah, and Capture, like for a shared list, is really important. If you, again, going back to that stress level, my wife, if she is at the grocery store right now, she'll try to think of things that I want. But if I just put it into a list ahead of time, and we can update the same list over and over again, you click it off and it's gone. And so we have a shared grocery list, and I could put something on there right now. So if I think of and I did that, by the way, we got home from Michigan. The first thing I said is I need blueberries and bananas. I put that on the list. I have no idea when she was going to go or if I was going to go, because we both share in those duties pretty well. Didn't know who was going, but I knew that we'd have that list. And so I knew that there's a good chance of either I went or if she went, we would get the items that we needed. So I think lists or notes are really, really important. What are other notes that you might have put together? I love that you're keeping ones about your kids.
Yeah, I really, so we've had this conversation before, but my main focus in life right now is my family.
Yeah.
I like to grow personally and I like to do all these other kinds of things, but I would regret a life where I found out that was at the cost of my family interaction. And that's difficult because when I get fired up about something, I want to do it.
Yeah.
And I want to be in it as much as possible because I have fun doing it. But then at the same time, I don't want to look back and be like, oh, well, 2 years got behind me. And what is my kid doing now? I know he's playing baseball and all of that kind of stuff. But that's just my priority. And so based off of that, I really did believe folks when they told me that it goes by in a blur and you don't know it until it's over, that can be that fast. And I mean, you're in a position where you're about to be an empty nester. Yeah. And so you're like, I'm in the middle and you're on the end of like the kid
Yeah.
Like the kids being kids.
I think it is so important. I mean, everything we talked about today, you created this framework, I believe, so that you could spend time on things that matter the most. And I truly mean, like, we're not I don't believe at the end of the day, highly successful people, once they get there, do what's next because they want to do more tasks. I believe they want to do things that are meaningful.
It's armor for sure, because you set yourself up to be able to tell in the moment when you're asked about something whether you can or cannot do it.
Yeah.
And having that in there, it shows priority. And for me, that's like whether the priority is your kid or your time or whatever it is, knowing the answer to that question and then applying that strategy to your calendar is that's the intent. And then pulling all this, like, capturing the things so as much stuff as possible. Whether it be an actual task or an event or just an idea, it's like you've got all the stuff that you can now do stuff with.
Yeah.
And then the digestion, the consistency in getting in there and making sure that it goes to live where it's supposed to, that if it's supposed to be on the calendar, it is on the calendar, and all of that kind of stuff. And I do agree with you to a certain degree that, like, I do the things I do to protect my priorities for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like that I'm being held back. You know what I mean? And so I feel like I'm accomplishing the things that I want, and I'm spreading out at the same time. And so it may not be as much vertical movement as I want right now, because I do have to self-check. And so I guess in some ways it is detrimental to my mindset if I need to be productive for myself and I'm not doing that intentionally, it still feels bad.
Yeah, I'm with you. I know what you mean there. And you're right. When you're younger, getting stuff done is the most important part of what you're doing, because you're trying to establish yourself. You're trying to do this. And so I'm at a different spot. I can look back at the last 20 years and go, oh my gosh, I did a couple of things. And so all of that being said, I think whatever your goal is, this framework will work.
Yeah.
I think everybody has to capture their ideas and their thoughts. I think everybody then has, and I think it's important. If there's one thing I'm getting out of today, it's capture in one place. I've got to start doing that to become better at this, instead of I'm trying to capture and digest at the same time a lot of times.
Capture separately.
Yeah.
And for anybody else who's listening, if you can capture and digest at the same time, that's fine. Just know that it will take more time in the end. And it'll be more confusing because you're like, should I put it here? Should I put it there? And that defeats the purpose of capture.
Just capture.
Quick.
Yep. Just capture. Have an app, have a notebook, have a way to put it on something other than your mind.
And then go to that bucket consistently.
Yeah.
And then have places that or have a methodology that's consistent that you apply to it once you go to the bucket. And like I said, I've got it figured out for me, and you can use the framework and adapt it to whatever you want. And so I've got it. You've seen the diagram. Like, I've got it visualized out. Do you think that's something that we should share?
If you're willing to share that, I'm looking at it right now. I think it's something that I think maybe we take a couple, make it a little bit more, because it's a lot to digest.
It is. It is, especially if you've never looked at a Visio before.
Yeah. I think that idea again of capture and then digesting. I think it's important to say you don't have to do the clearing of the bucket every day. Like if you're
that's the goal.
You're a CEO. You've got things in your bucket. I'm not saying other people are not as important as you, but if you do that on Monday and Wednesdays, and that just happens to be the day that you're clearing, or Monday and Thursday, because there's only a couple of things that go on there, and you don't ever have any urgencies. But if you have urgency, there's certain things. But I don't want people to freak out if they don't every day have a 9 a.m. clearing the bucket.
Yeah, don't feel bad if you don't do it every day. Yeah. But you've got to know the priority or the types of priority that you're putting into your bucket. So if you're doing something like, say if it's Friday night, we'll call it Monday night.
Okay.
And then you're like, remind me tomorrow to do this thing, which is exactly what I tell when that's how I talk when I capture. Remind me tomorrow to do this thing because of this, or however detailed I need to be. And say it's time sensitive, like I got to sign a contract before the fiscal end of a quarter or something like that. And then I don't do it, then I've broken everything, because the intent of me capturing it is to get it done in time. And so my specific cadence has to be every weekday at the least. And so I can skip all weekend because business isn't happening over that. And, my home tasks are a lot more lenient than work tasks are sometimes. And not every work task is like, got to do it today. It's just like, I'd prefer to do it today to get it over with. But if it winds up getting kicked down the road, that's fine too. But that's mentally, that has been my biggest challenge, is not feeling like a piece of crap for not doing exactly what I'm supposed to do, even though I know what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I think we've been talking about this for a little bit of time today. And Charlie, really, I want to thank you for sharing your process for today. Each one of these, I think capture was our big one today that we spent a lot of time on, and I think is a good takeaway. And there's so many other ways we can look at digestion and notes. But I think we did those justice as well today, for sure. And
there are other pieces to the framework too, like how you store files, like digital organization.
We're going to get to all of that. Yeah. I mean, because there is. I was looking at like file management. We've talked about how I code or how I name things is something. I think all of that over time is going to be fun to do. And I also like that, we spent a couple of minutes today just talking about your, what do you call them again?
The toe spreaders.
Toe spreaders.
No. I think that's what they're called.
Well,
you know what I'm talking about, though.
I definitely know what you're talking about.
So I'll tell you how it goes.
Yoga Toes is what the name of the brand that is our white elephant.
So that's a different thing.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, so there are different types of toe spreaders. And so Yoga Toes is like I'm sitting in a chair. I'm not really walking around with it. The ones I got are I could wear socks and shoes with them.
Oh.
But I'm not going to do that right on the front end because I feel like wearing those for a whole day right now would kill my feet.
Gotcha. Well, we'll keep up with your toe spreaders over
my toe flexibility
over the next few months. I'll share. I think what I'd like to share in the next let's say like 6 months is I'm going to smartify my new home. And I'd love to share some of that stuff. I'm starting from the ground up, and I'll right now I'm deciding, do I want to use Eufy, which I made the recommendation for in our Christmas episode, but then they had a little bit of a data breach, and I have to decide, do I want to stick with that or move to an Arlo or a Blink or something else?
Yeah, let's discuss that pretty soon then, because you're moving in the next couple months, right?
Fingers crossed within the next month.
Nice.
So yes, I think that'll be fun to talk about that. And anything else that you can leave us with on this great topic?
No, I do just want to reiterate the importance of like giving yourself some leeway.
Yeah.
Beating myself up is a pastime for me personally, and like I've had to learn that regardless of how I feel, I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And even if that means throwing the brakes on because my kids take priority, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I know that because I've captured enough to have everything kind of like I can see the path, so to speak. And that's what's important, even if I'm not walking down the path. I can deviate here and there or just stop in my tracks.
Yeah.
But it's there. It exists. It's perpetual. And so I can just re-engage whenever I want to because I've taken the time to write it down, to organize it, and all those other things. Whereas if I was building something up that wasn't as solid and I let it go, the moment I start forgetting about the pieces, it starts to fall apart.
Yeah, that's why I like it's a framework first. And then it's not complex. Capture, digest it, and then identify how it's going to be either processed or stored, and whether it's a short-term or a long-term note, and what that means over time, and be consistent with it, I think is consistent with doing it and consistent in where you put it or the tool that you use, because that will change. If you use 8 different note apps like I have over time, that makes it more difficult for sure. So,
but those changes are good though. because it ultimately helps you grow into the best process for you.
Well, good. I'm glad that it's not, I don't have to feel bad about it. And I think it is important to think that this process or a tool should not make you feel worse about doing something. It should make you feel better.
Yeah.
And by simplifying it, keeping the tool stack pretty small, I think you're able to do that a lot better. And thank you for that. So I think we did a good enough job with this. Anything else?
No, that's it for me. I enjoy all of this. I do, I do teach this in a volunteer capacity, but I also have a webinar that I do once a month
Yeah.
that anybody can sign up for, and we cover all of this kind of stuff top to bottom too.
Great. We'll definitely put the link, at least to the next one, in the show notes, so we can get that and love that. So again, thank you everybody for listening. How we process your data. I'm Charlie Apigian.
And until next time, I'm going to remain Charlie Wilkin.
You're going to stay Charlie Yielding, and yes, until next time.